I'm Elaine Engelhardt from Utah Valley State. Welcome to class. Today is our final class period on the topic of war and nuclear war, and we're going to be moving into the literary perspectives and how these enhance our appreciation of the topic. And today our guest is going to be Alex Caldiero. Thanks so much for being with us, Alex. Appreciate you. And let me introduce you to the students. Over here we have John and Cassie, and here Rhonda and Aaron. And thanks to all of you for being here. And Alex, would you tell us about yourself, your background, and also why you like literature?
Wow, and I have 3 minutes to do this. 2.5 minutes? Well, the time is ticking already. I'm a poet artist in residence here at UVSC. I teach humanities courses and an ethics and values course. Literature, why I like literature, well, it's nothing to like or dislike. Literature is a very central part of my life, basically. So I never really think about liking it or disliking it.
Okay, and you're a Sicilian.
Yes, and it was so fortuitous that Luigi Pirandello is one of the gents we're going to be talking about. You didn't plan that, did you?
I didn't. No, I didn't plan it.
You see, that's beautiful.
And it just couldn't have been better.
All right, all right. Luigi Pirandello. Oh. Yeah, it sort of rolls off your tongue.
Oh, it really does.
Yeah, Luigi, he is a sweetheart.
He is. In fact, we'll get all the proper pronunciations of the train stations, too, as we're looking at this piece.
That's right.
Yes. From the students, what did you think about this first piece we're going to look at by Luigi Pirandello?
Insightful.
Okay, Rhonda, insightful. What made it insightful?
Well, you know, the poignancy of losing a child, you know, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 to war, you know, the cost of, you know, somebody can't say, well, you just lost 1. They're all the same, you grieve it all. The way that he puts, that he expresses and explains the different characters in his story, he comes to a great insight in the psychological aspect of suffering and death and how you deal with it.
Okay, anyone else want to comment on their insights on this particular piece on war? Aaron?
I liked the dichotomy of the as he puts it, the fat traveler. What he says and the reaction at the end. I liked the turn that took. I thought it was interesting and brought something unique to the story.
Powerful, really powerful. So Rhonda, you're going to tell us a little bit about Luigi, and then we'll have Alex tell us some more.
Well, he was an Italian dramatist and novelist. He won the 1934 Nobel Prize in Literature. In fact, I think he did that a couple times. He's written over 300 stories and plays. He was born in 1867 and died in 1936, and the story that we're working on, War, was written in 1919, which was just a year after the First World War ended.
That's what I thought.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, then let's go ahead and just come right into this story. And do you want to give us some background on it too, Alex?
Yeah, I think that I was guessing in my mind that it was immediately after the First World War. Because you see, the First World War really began to, for the first time, at least in a major way, to question the very honorable activity of killing human beings in this thing called war. You know, that was supposed to be the war to end all wars. Remember that?
Right.
You know, almost everyone you met in Europe knew somebody that had died, I mean, directly.
Well, and you know why that is, Alex? There were 65 million men that were called to all the world's armies, navies, and air forces in that period of time of the World War I.
Yeah, so this story specifically is about an inner dialogue. I see all these characters here as one person, you know, talking about, you know, and questioning the art of war, and questioning its value, it's questioning human life, you know. And so as I'm reading this, you know, there's this kind of questioning what it meant to be a man All these things were very, very taken for granted as assumptions before this time period. You know, in the 19th century, 18th century, especially in the 300-400 years prior to this, you know, nobody questioned, you know, whether you should go to war or not.
Right.
I mean, that was a given fact. Okay, and this is one of the, as a matter of fact, this is one I see in the other texts as well, as basically this kind of questioning that is going on, you know, about, you know, very set assumptions that we have of what a man is, of what duty is to your country, you know, the fatherland, you know, the king, you know, what is the relationship? These were all givens before this time, okay? And so I think this is a very important story because of that fact. It is an early example of an examination, all right, an examination, which we're still doing to this very day, okay? This is not something that, it started around this time, after the First World War, in an active way. And it's something that, you know, reached a real peak, for instance, during the Vietnam War, you know, and continues to be, for us Americans especially, you know, a topic of reevaluation, you know, the ethics of war, which sometimes almost sounds like a contradiction in terms, you know, and we're in that process right now. So this is a very important piece, primarily for that reason. It's a deep examination of conscience. You know, as I said, I view all these as different parts raising the same question, you know, the same question from various points of views, you know, and at the end, you know, ultimately, one of the things that is going to change consciousness is going to be the ability to totally grieve.
To totally grieve. And let me ask our literature major here, and we've got Cassie. And Cassie, tell us a little bit about what you think is the importance of talking about literature in regards to these areas of ethics, war and nuclear war, and how this piece really brings it to life.
I think it's always important that we talk about those issues, but for some people it's not going to get through to them just by normal means of talking about it, and it takes something like a good story or a good characters, art to get through to them and to really reach them. And so for me, that's how it works best for me anyway.
So Alex gave us just an outstanding background and need for discussion on war and how it was kind of left out. How do the characters help you bring World War I to life, John?
You identify with them. I think that's the real power of a story, is that you identify with the characters, and there's a situation created where you are kind of put in their shoes, and you're going to understand exactly what, or there's going to be an attempt to make you understand what they're feeling.
Okay, thank you. So, Alex, do you mind reading that first paragraph for us?
Sure, I would. The passengers who had left Rome by the night express had to stop until dawn at the small station of Fabriano in order to continue their journey by the small old-fashioned local joining the main line with Sulmona.
Okay, thank you. It was nice to have you read these towns for us so that we had that proper pronunciation. And now we're introduced to our main characters in this story. So who wants to tell us a little bit about these main characters in the story? Erin, do you want to try it for us?
I'll try it. You get the large woman and her small husband behind her coming in, her wrapped in black, and that's kind of how I pictured it. She's just head to toe black, and her husband, and he says a tiny man, and he talks about his eyes and the whiteness of his skin, and like he hasn't seen the sun, very removed, and they get themselves situated on the train is how we first meet them.
Yeah, everybody helps get her on too. He uses the word hoists her onto the train.
And I like how they describe her just as a shapeless bundle. Just she's a bundle of emotion. She's a bundle of, I don't know. She's just all.
Yes, a bundle of a human
Right.
being. Okay.
Yeah, it gives you the impression of being shrouded.
Well, already she is in mourning, okay, because these women especially, they never stop wearing black, okay? They never stop wearing black.
So in Italy, once you go into mourning, you basically
Well,
stay
it
in mourning.
depends. There are different time periods for each relative. You know, if it's a husband, you're supposed to wear black for life. You know, if it's an uncle, if it's a son, 25 years, whatever it is. And for one reason or another, they end up wearing black all their lives because there's somebody always dying.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the, so already, death is nothing new here, and it's ever present, by that wearing of that black.
Yeah. Well, now that he's kind of made a commotion getting on the train, then he's feeling like he needs to tell people why they're there. And so, Cassie, would you read for us first column, about halfway down, and he felt it his duty.
Okay. And he felt it his duty to explain to his traveling companions that the poor woman was to be pitied, for the war was taking away from her only son, a boy of 20 to whom both had devoted their entire life, even breaking up their home at Smolna to follow him to Rome, where he had to go as a student, then allowing him to volunteer for war with an assurance, however, that at least for 6 months he would not be sent to the front, and now, all of a sudden, receiving a wire saying that he was due to leave in 3 days' time and asking them to go and see him off.
Okay, thank you. And so basically she's already in mourning. She's in mourning from the time that her son's been consigned or drafted, and now in shock because he has to leave earlier than she expected. And they certainly seem to be a tight-knit family, don't they? Any comments about this?
I think it's interesting in the next paragraph, she was twisting and wriggling and growling like a wild animal, feeling certain all these explanations weren't sufficient. And she's not only unable to get onto the train herself, but she's unable to communicate herself. She's unable she's just unable to function. She's completely lost the capability to even be described as really very human here,
Okay.
which is interesting.
She knows the potential. Here's her only son, and they're such a tight-knit family that they follow him when he goes to school, and now he's going off to what could be death. And she's not sure why. I suppose that as we move on, the son knows why, but she's not sure why. Alex, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, amongst the common folks, who, farming folks, simple folks, war was such an abstraction, generally. In that context, it was such an abstraction that there was never really even, what is that about? Why would anybody do that? It was always, because these folks are dealing in a very personal, everyday, kind of direct context to everything. Somebody offends you, yeah. It's a one-to-one, it's a personal thing. The earth, relationships, those are very, very concrete. War is an abstraction.
And she can't deal with it. She can't. She's just can't function.
Yeah.
So Rhonda, where does the story go from here?
We go from there to, of course, she is telling, is it she or is it her husband that's telling the fact that their only son is going, and that he was given kind of a 6-month reprieve from going to the front line. And so in explanation to that, there's another individual that says, well, what about me? I have 2 sons and 3 nephews at the front. It's like, you have nothing to complain about, woman.
Okay. And then Cassie.
It just seems like everyone on the train, everyone has someone in the war, and everyone's trying to top each other almost with.
Yeah.
who's got the worst situation, or I have this many sons, my nephews.
Yes, and since I've got 2 sons, I've got double the love of you have for just 1 son.
By the time, it gets to the end of that, that exchange of one trying to top the other, you get the very distinct feeling that this is absurd.
Yes.
This measuring of life against life, is really absurd. And that, I think, is one of the things that Pirandello wants to communicate, that all life is precious. All life is precious, period. And to try to put a value on it in that way, it just becomes this kind of weird exchange amongst these people trying to, see who's got, the bigger sorrow.
Yes.
Well, and I guess the father, the slight man, he says to another, well, you have 2. You have at least, if one kills, has died, then you have one to console you.
Yeah.
It's this division of children.
Yes. Well, John, let's have you help us a little bit more with this. Page 275, second column, last paragraph.
Okay. Bosh, retorted the fat traveler. Do we think of the country when we give life to our children? Our sons are born because they must be born, and when they come to life, they take our own life with them. This is the truth. We belong to them, but they never belong to us. And when they reach 20, they are exactly what we were at their age. We too had a father and a mother, but there were so many other things as well. Girls, cigarettes, illusions, new ties, and the country, of course, whose call we would have answered when we were 20, even if father and mother had said no. Now, at our age, the love of our country is still great, of course, but stronger than it is the love for our children. Is there any one of us here who wouldn't gladly take his son's place at the front if he could?
Okay, and everyone nods to this question. So what's going on here then, John?
It sounds like the fat traveler he's attempting to justify exactly why we send our children to war, and he's also saying, we would take their place if we possibly could.
But he's sure distancing himself, isn't he? He's saying, hey, they're not ours. They belong to the country. They're their own people. They're girls, cigarettes, ties. Whatever. They become their own people.
That's what we call in denial.
But wait a minute. He says they don't belong.
Right.
To the country, because in the paragraph just before what John read, he's interrupted the competition discussion, and he said this is all nonsense, and then he says, do we give life to our children for our own benefit? And then the other traveler says, you are right, our children do not belong to us, they belong to the country. That's what he says bosh to. He says they don't belong to the country, they belong to themselves, and they choose.
But then he seems to contradict himself later on.
You're correct. It's the traveler before him who says the children do not belong to us; they belong to the country. And he says, no, they don't. They belong to themselves. They don't belong to us. And then Cassie, do you want to say anything about how he contradicts himself then?
Let's see, he says...
It's in that next paragraph.
Right. Do you want me to just read that?
Sure.
Okay. Why then, continued the fat man, shouldn't we consider the feelings of our children when they are 20? Isn't it natural that at their age they should consider the love for their country, I am speaking of decent boys, of course, even greater than the love for us?
Okay, so here he's asking a rhetorical question, basically. So, and Alex, so during this time you're saying this was pretty natural then?
Well, that's what I mean. And he mentions several times, if you're decent, if you're a decent young man, when you reach of age, you go and serve your country. It's a given. It's a given. So, however, like I said before, what is going on here is a real early questioning of what it means, what patriotism is about, and is it an unconditional kind of thing? And if it is not unconditional, what are the conditions, under which such an act could be justified?
And so now he's going to end this up by saying, and I'm proud because my son, this is on 276 first column, end of that long paragraph in the middle, he said, "At least thank God as I do, because my son before dying sent me a message saying that he was dying satisfied as having ended his life in the best way he could have wished. That is why, you see, I do not even wear mourning." And, you know, shows his coat and everything
Well, it's also
else.
showing, you know, how people grieve differently. You know, that if you're going to accept the finality of your loved one, your son, gone, then perhaps, you know, it makes it all the softer if you can at least justify that it was a good cause.
Except that he's justifying it, and
Oh, I
don't
know.
think he's actually
you can read this
accepted
whole
the
paragraph
finality.
as entirely cynical.
Yes.
I really do.
Absolutely.
I think, I mean, there in the center, if country exists, if country is a natural necessity like bread, of which each of us must eat in order not to die of hunger, somebody must go and defend it. I just think that the lines in that paragraph are just, you could take it from a totally other perspective, that while he's legitimately wanting to mourn his son, he's instead covering it up not with softness but with a hard shell.
Actually, I disagree with that. I think in this particular situation, until we get to the end, this particular man is trying to justify himself so that he can continue living.
Okay, 2 more comments.
I'd have to agree with Aaron in a way. Just in the paragraph after that, where they describe he ended with a shrill laugh, which might have well been a sob. That just kind of sounds a little harsh and
Brittle.
yeah.
I think
He's getting there.
I view it almost as he's repeating things that he's heard. He's repeating justifications that he's heard for sending children to war. And I don't think that he really means them.
No, not, and it shows at the end, you know,
Yeah,
when he actually breaks.
Yep.
And he is, for a man, is he really breaking tradition also by not wearing mourning as tradition
Yeah, he
says
would be
should?
breaking tradition as well,
Uh-huh.
yeah. The men also wear, you know, a black jacket, white shirt, but usually black jacket and
Can
black
you imagine during this
pants.
period of time how everybody had been wearing black?
And-
1 in
and-
5 children died.
Like
at
I
this
said, it
war.
wasn't because of only the war. In life itself,
Sure.
generally, you know, it was just a prevalent thing, which we in our own society, we sort of hide the regularity with which death visits us. You know, we really don't recognize it. You know, in these places, it is always evident. It is always evident. And the births as well, by the way. You know, just not to
They're
to
the
be
most-
one-sided about it.
They're the most meaningful aspects
Yeah, the
of
life and death, you know, as a constant, is very, very much in evidence.
Certainly, and putting
Yeah.
marriage there in the middle.
Yeah,
Big
That's right.
celebration, big celebration.
Yeah.
So then we move on into the end of our story, and in the end of the story then the woman who has not been able to speak up to this point, she's listening to all this and she's getting the rationalization going. And Aaron, do you want to tell us a little bit about this? By the way, I don't think Aaron and Rhonda are too far apart on your points, but anyway, go ahead. Go
It is,
ahead.
yeah.
She's kind of taking it all in. It's like she suddenly took out earplugs or something, and she's suddenly hearing the conversation, feeling like someone might actually know what she fears the most, what she is feeling the most, what she feels like she can't escape the most. And that's when she turns to the traveler who has given us, in whatever way you want to look at it, this long soliloquy about why this is a good thing. And she asks him just straight out.
But first she thinks she's going to ask him an intellectual question, but instead another question came out, and it was, then is your son really dead? And Cassie, do you want to read this last paragraph
Sure.
for us?
Everybody stared at her. The old man, too, turned to look at her, fixing his great, bulging, horribly watery, light gray eyes deep in her face. For some little time he tried to answer, but words failed him. He looked and looked at her, almost as if only then, at that silly, incongruous question, he had suddenly realized at last that his son was really dead, gone forever, forever. His face contracted, became horribly distorted. Then he snatched in haste a handkerchief from his pocket and, to the amazement of everyone, broke into a harrowing, heart-rending, uncontrollable sobs.
Okay, thank you. Alex, do you want to tell us a little bit about this conclusion then, why it's so powerful.
You know, one of the things that we need to learn, you know, that especially in our own society that we have a problem with, is this idea of grieving. You know, grieving. And grieving is a very physical kind of process, not just mental.
It's painful.
You know, it's not just an internal emotional thing. It is a physical thing. And we kind of leave that part out many times, you know. And I think that, you know, this guy got a reality check. He was trying to cover up and go in a state of denial using patriotism, using all the lines that have been given and everything, you know. And then when this simple woman, you know, really lays it out as a question, you know, is he dead? And at that point, you know, there's this convulsive, physical, you know, sobbing as it is used here, uncontrollable sobs.
Heaving.
Okay? All right, we're talking again, a physical process. And so he's begun now. He's begun this realization, you know, of what this thing called war is about. And he's begun the reevaluation of all the givens that he had been given, you know, and grieving is the way to really reevaluate.
And almost
Okay.
like he didn't feel like he was entitled, but now he can't hold back anymore. And it sounds like also in the society, he shouldn't have been holding back.
Well, in that time and place, men sobbing is not an unusual thing.
Well, it still isn't.
Yeah.
You know?
Aaron, one last comment on this
I
one.
actually had a question for Alex or for you, Elaine. I think there's something being said, though I don't quite know what it is, about this idea of grieving, and if we hide it behind the patriotism, if we hide it behind the stock answers, that somehow this process never moves forward.
Yes.
And
Yes.
is I think that maybe the author is calling for something more robust than the you know, pulling out just the stock answers.
It absolutely is. I have a lot of experience on the subject as well, and it is a terrifically powerful time in life where you really don't know even who you are anymore as you're working through your grief.
Yep.
And it's not a short thing.
No.
Years. It really is years.
You know, that's the, you know, just, it's kind of an interesting, that last comment that you made, that it's actually years. You know, so many people in our society want you to get your grief over with.
Get it over
you know,
with.
get on with living, you know, and there's not an acceptance, not a well-accepted acceptance anyway, of some people take a long time to grieve, and when you don't let them,
Yeah, it's not an event.
can't connect
You see,
back
it's a
in.
process.
Yeah.
It's a process. You know, we think of grieving as an event. You know, all right, he's cried his eyes out. All right, let's tomorrow he's got to go to work. You know.
Oh, yeah.
And it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, in fact, I'd like to tie in this notion of grieving into our next poem. And since you're our poet, could I get you to read our poem by Richard Lovelace, To Lucasta Going to the Wars?
Lovely Lovelace.
Yes.
Tell me not, sweet, I am unkind, that from the nunnery of thy chaste breast and quiet mind to war and arms I fly. True, a new mistress now I chase, the first foe in the field, and with a stronger faith embrace a sword, a horse, a shield. Yet this inconstancy is such as you too shall adore. I could not love thee, dear, so much loved I not honor more.
Okay, thank you, Alex. And I noticed that John had his hand up over here, and I don't know if you can tie your 2 points together, but here we've got a very strong message about the honor of war. And tell us a little bit about that, John.
I have a lot a lot of trouble with it. And kind of going back to the last story, it's almost like we can talk all we want about the honor of war, but in the end, grief is a very human thing, and it's going to, all those justifications, all those ideas that we have about honor, about war being this grand thing, that a patriotic thing, in the end, when there's grief, all those justifications don't matter anymore.
Okay.
So.
And Cassie.
To go along with that, I thought that was really good. Basically, the feeling that I get from reading the last one and this poem is that grief and honor and patriotism can never outweigh or overcome emotions, human emotion, grief or love, or it's never greater. Those things are never greater than human emotions.
Okay, thank you. So we have this poet, Richard Lovelace, and he's born in 1618, and he is a wealthy gentleman. He is seen as witty and handsome and quick, and people certainly love him at the court. He's just one of these people that they like being around, and he enjoys writing a lot of poetry, but he also has a deep devotion to his country, and he does go off to war. He's injured. His Lucasta, she's not really Lucasta, thinks he has died, and she marries someone else. And so in loving honor more than her, he's lost his Lucasta. But do you want to tell us a little bit about the importance of reading this poem by Lovelace?
Yeah, well, in contrast, this is the more traditional kind of take that now Pirandello's piece is throwing into question. Okay? During this time, of course, this is how we've been trained to think about war. All right? The main thing right there is that even he, with all of his devotion to honor, etc., even he picks out that there's an inconsistency, that he feels a contradiction, but he resolves it. You see? Not through grief, okay, not through grief, but through honor, yes, even more than love, of a personal nature, love of country, love of, and honor is a different thing than love, actually, all right? It's not love of country, but maintaining your honor. Remember, he was a court poet, all right, a cavalier.
Absolutely.
And so there was all this thing of honor as being proof of your manhood, proof of your truthfulness and anything. So there's all these things, and that's what he chooses.
Okay, thank you. And Rhonda,
I think his choice of the word mistress, true, a new mistress now I chased. Mistress is generally this intoxicating love that you cannot divide yourself from. It's an all-encompassing, engrossing, I can't do anything else, and so there isn't even a loyalty, to anything else except that one object.
Okay, great
Nice.
comment. And Erin?
In reading the Pirandello and then this, I feel like we have both that the mature, the parent, the older generation perspective in the Pirandello, and then here we have the 20-year-old. This is the youthful. This is the I'm wrapped up in these notions of honor and duty and these almost medievalist kind of knight in shining armor concepts. I am the hero. I am the one. And it falls to me because I am that important. But nonetheless, I think that's we get that dual perspective there.
And I think that this is a good piece for balance because, you look back, and from our writings in Thomas Hobbes, we really have wars all the time, and you are always trying to defend your property, your state, what belongs to you. And so he really feels very strongly about this. I need to protect this place that I love, these people that I love. And he doesn't seem to us like he'd probably be the best of soldiers, But for him, it's an important thing because you're always in this Hobbesian state of war and defending your stuff. So it is a little different than what we see today. Alex, any last words on this before we move on to the next one?
No, I think those are good points.
I
Those
do
are good
too.
Points.
Yeah. Rhonda.
Cassie had a point.
Cassie does. Okay.
I was just going to say one last thing that I thought was funny is that this is in a sonnet form, and sonnets are usually love songs, and it's to Lucasta, so you'd think that it was a love song to Lucasta, but he's actually seems to love war more than her. He says, with a stronger faith, he will embrace a sword, a horse, a shield. So there's more faith. He talks about embracing, and it's just kind of funny.
Good points, all very good points. Well, let's move on to a really favorite piece of ours, Mark Twain's The War Prayer. And in the War Prayer, we see once again an incredible contrast. So we've got the Civil War going on, and Rhonda, do you want to tell us a little bit about Mark Twain?
Yeah, of course we all know Mark Twain was his pen name. He's actually Samuel Clemens. This is kind of interesting because Mark Twain lived between 1835 and 1910, and it's just interesting for two reasons. One, he lived through the Civil War, which the War Prayer is actually written for, but he died just before World War I.
Yeah.
And I find that interesting. Of course, he was, his formal education ended in his teens, but he has always been very involved in politics and places and people, and his writings reflect that.
What a wonderful satirist he really is. In fact, Erin, will you tell us a little bit about this this story and the satire in it?
Well, I think the interesting point he's trying to make over and over again is the calling upon one's God, particularly one's omnibenevolent God, to wreak havoc, and the interesting dichotomy that's there, and it just lends itself so well to the satire. I mean, really, the whole first paragraph is just amazing. You're just moved by him.
Yeah, but I mean, it's exciting. We're going to war, and there's so many reasons for this excitement of going to war.
Well, this particular paper was initially rejected by Harper's, the women's magazine, Harper's Bazaar. It was too radical at the time, and it wasn't published until after his death.
Okay, I hadn't realized that.
Yeah.
That's a great insight. Anything from either John or Cassie? Okay,
I think it's great. I think we should read some.
Okay.
You know, one thing that I wanted to say was that as soon as he begins to give the other side, I heard his voice.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
You know, in the first part, there's this kind of other person speaking. And this is the beauty about Mark Twain, that he had such a distinctive and a very, very different take, again, from the traditional point of view about war. You know, letters, what is it, Letters from the Earth? You know, is a very vital document, you know, in terms of reevaluating who we are. You know, but I heard his voice distinctly come in, you know, and jabbing at all of this, our belief of the arrogance, you know, the arrogance of the human animal, you know, especially, you know, that we're praying to the God, you know, and we don't care about anything else.
And it's a very long prayer, and it's a prayer that's rather showy, where, you know, he says things about crushing the foe, grant them their flag and their country, imperishable honor and glory. And he's, oh Lord, our God, Father, protector of our land and flag. And so he's got a lot of showiness in this long prayer as well. So everyone's excited. Sunday comes. They can hardly wait for the minister for his prayer that he's going to give them. And then this aged stranger, where we could really hear his voice, who who was later declared insane.
Exactly. That's why it was not published in his lifetime.
Comes and taps him on the shoulder and says, yeah, I come from the throne and I'm bearing a message here. And he says on the bottom of page 281, God's servant and yours has prayed his prayer. Has he paused and taken thought? Is it one prayer? No, it is two. One uttered, the other not. And so he's going to say it has this double meaning. So if you don't mind, maybe, Alex, we'll have you read this war prayer for us. And it starts on page, for you students, 282, first column, halfway down. O Lord our Father.
O Lord our Father, our young patriots, idols of our hearts, go forth to battle. Be thou near them, with them, in spirit. We also go forth from the sweet peace of our beloved firesides to smite the foe. O Lord our God, help us to tear their soldiers to bloody shreds with our shells. Help us to cover their smiling fields with the pale forms of their patriot dead. Help us to drown the thunder of the guns with the shrieks of their wounded, writhing in pain. Help us to lay waste their humble homes with a hurricane of fire. Help us to wring the hearts of their unoffending widows with unavailing grief. Help us to turn them out roofless with their little children, to wander unfriended the wastes of their desolate land in rags and hunger and thirst, sports of the sun flames of summer and the icy winds of winter, broken in spirit, worn with travail, imploring thee for the refuge of the grave and denying it. For our sakes who adore thee, Lord, blast their hopes, blight their lives, protract their bitter pilgrimage, make heavy their steps, water their way with their tears, stain the white snow with the blood of their wounded feet. We ask it in the spirit of love, of him who is the source of love, and who is the ever faithful refuge and friend of all that are sore beset and seek his aid with humble and contrite hearts. Amen.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's an amazing reading to an amazing piece. Why is this piece so important, Cassie?
I think that kind of what we were talking about earlier, oftentimes we don't think about the other side of things, the other people that we are fighting in battles and what they are suffering, what our victory means to them and how they suffer, and is that right or is that fair? Of course not, but.
And John, it's so ridiculous that at times you smile and almost laugh. Tell me a little bit about his choice of words, the way that he is so brilliantly sarcastic in this.
Well, the person giving the prayer is obviously, being very satirical. He's being very sarcastic, and he wants to use very powerful language to express that, hey, this is what could happen to the other side if we are victorious. Which also makes me wonder, we were talking earlier about how this piece was considered too radical to be published in his lifetime. I wonder if maybe a reason for that was people weren't used to being sympathetic to the other side in a war.
Because it makes fighting more difficult.
Yeah, it
Yes.
does.
Aaron.
I think he himself knew it wouldn't be published, and I think he gives us a foreshadowing to not only the end, but to the idea in the very last sentence of that first paragraph.
Will you read that, Aaron?
It was indeed a glad and gracious time. He's gone through all the flags and the whole thing, and the half-dozen rash spirits that ventured to disapprove of the war and cast a doubt upon its righteousness straightway got such a stern and angry warning that for their personal safety's sake they quickly shrank out of sight and offended no more in that way.
Okay, thank you. And then the last
the
paragraph
last,
of the whole reading.
Ye, after a pause, ye have prayed it. If ye still desire it, speak. the messenger of the Most High waits. It was believed afterward that the man was a lunatic because there was no sense in what he said.
Okay, once again, foreshadowing that it probably wasn't going to be published. Rhonda.
And I see in this his exhaustion after that prayer. And
Alex had exhaustion too.
He did.
Yeah.
And I can see and feel that, you know, and that particular, you have prayed it. If you still desire it, speak. God waits. You know, you're going to seal your own fate. You know, it's interesting that when this article was published, it was 2 years into the First World War. And, you know, and the millions of lives that were lost, millions. It couldn't have come too soon.
You know, Alex, this prayer has taught me things in my own daily life. In fact, I will go back to the end of the prayer where he says, we ask it in the spirit of love of him who is the source of love and who is ever faithful, refuge and friend of all that are sore and beseek his aid. And, you know, and I start thinking about my own hypocrisy, my own contradictions, and I can always go right back to this line for so many situations.
And that's what's so terrible, though, is because, you know, everybody looked at him dumbfounded. It was like, what in the world did you just say?
Yeah.
You know, they didn't hear. You know, they were tuned into the minister, but they could not hear the other.
Yes. Aaron, a final comment, and then I'll have Alex give a final comment on it.
I think that people still don't hear. No. Because when I read the line, help us to turn them out roofless with their little children to wander, I thought of our reading of the children of Hiroshima and other such horrific stories and true life happenings, and they still go on. I mean, that's the beauty of Twain and the Pirandello piece and the Lucasta, is that they don't date themselves in such a way that they aren't still applicable, that we still can't talk about this and have a question.
They do. They withstand the test of time. Thank you. Concluding comment on this one.
Yeah, you know, it really, really speaks to the fact that human arrogance knows no bounds. You know, God is on my side. Okay, and that is a very dangerous kind of thought that we're still trying to understand and to deal with. You know, God is on my side, of course. Okay, and so, you know, this it's beyond sarcasm. This thing, it almost hurts.
It does hurt.
You understand? It almost hurts what he's revealing about human nature in that alternate prayer. It almost hurts about what is revealing about this hypocrisy in our human nature.
Isn't he saying, shame on you?
So I think that, and you're right, it never ceases to apply. Okay, because this is a process that we're still involved in, you know, especially as part of, as children of the 20th century. You know, and there are some things that we really need to find some bona fide new responses to. You know, and I think that pieces like this, it's good to revisit them and to use them as reality checks and to examine our own conscience in a real way, you know, so
And this does it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And, you know, our next piece ties into it quite well, too. Here we have Isaac Asimov. And, of course, he's a prolific author, and this is just a short story of his, but I'm so glad to be able to introduce the students to Isaac Asimov through this piece called Silly Asses. And, Rhonda, do you want to tell us a little bit about Isaac Asimov?
Just a little bit that I know. He was prolific. A prolific writer in not only science fiction, but in the field of science and humanities. He also was a member of Mensa.
Oh, yeah.
Which you have to have an IQ of at least 132, which, you know, puts you on the genius level, you know, if you want to take those kinds of charts. But he, you know, as our text says, he's written more than 340 books, which astounds me. but let's get into them.
Yeah, and one of them was on anthrax. I read a great book by Isaac Asimov. It was a true science book, not science fiction, and I learned more about anthrax than I have it, because he's a writer. So he could write about science very, very well. So he truly was prolific. Well, what are your favorite parts of this reading?
How about in the middle?
Right. Well,
Or the end.
Or the end. Erin, I'll pick on you again to tell us about the characters. So we've got Neron.
Well, it's kind of hard to describe, I guess, because it's science fiction, but basically you have this alien life form, alien to us, that he was keeping galactic records. So he's keeping a journal, a list of the entire galaxy, and basically keeping track of which worlds have achieved a certain kind of intelligence. Are they, when they exist, are they wiped out? Just the very basics, and what he terms maturity at one point. And so a messenger runs in to tell him that another group of organisms has attained maturity.
Maturity meaning thermonuclear power.
Exactly, is what we find out.
Maturity and thermonuclear power. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, that's exactly where I was headed, so it worked just fine. The idea that they had thermonuclear power, and then he says, okay, well now they should have space stations because they need to have somewhere to test it. Have they achieved, you know, the ability to work in space, and when are they going to start traveling outside of their world?
The thermonuclear power should be used for.
Well, he says not even that it should be used for, but that if they wanted to test it, they would have to get outside or off their own world in order to do so. And the messenger says, oh, they haven't. And he's like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, how are they testing it? How did they know they have it? Like, what? He's confused. And the guy says, no, they're testing it on their own planet. And he says, that's when the great denouement, silly asses.
Well, it just kind of crosses off Earth, you know, they're not going to be around anymore.
Earth is crossed off the list. Insights then from John or Cassie. John.
I think it's interesting because, especially for Isaac Asimov, it's almost like we're spending all this time figuring out, inventing weapons to destroy each other when we could be inventing things to explore space. And I mean, that's what he says.
I think it is exactly what he's saying. Yeah.
Neron says, you know, oh, then they're going to make contact with us. If they've reached maturity, then they're soon to make contacts with us. And the guy's just like, no, they haven't even penetrated space yet.
Yeah.
So for Asimov, I think
we're so concerned about war. And you know what I love about this piece was that it was written in 1957. Yeah. You know.
Well, no, it makes sense because, you know, the atomic bomb and the age that it heralded, you know, this makes perfect sense as a critique, you know, of all the things that took place in society, in American society especially, you know, and it was a major time for this reevaluation, you know, another major leap, you know, in really saying, wow, we're no longer killing ourselves only. We could blow this whole thing off the galaxy.
Sure. And I'm really glad you brought that up, because in the class we've been showing clips of all the testing that was going on in the 50s, some in the in the late 40s,
right
50s, and 60s.
Right on target, no pun intended.
Yeah, and of course some people are very concerned, and others are saying, you know, this is the best use of funding. This is, you know, to find out how we can keep ourselves safe, destroy others. So we have two more comments, and we'll let Alex have the final word. So Rhonda and Erin.
You know, the second to last line. Neron was very wise and could see the inevitable as well as anyone in the galaxy, except Earth.
That we blow ourselves up with this. And Erin.
I just liked Alex's point about the idea of it being so important that it was written in 57, because there was also this idea that science could save us. And that new technology was all the rage, right? I mean, that's what you want. You want the best, everything from the best blender to the best atom bomb. So I think what Asimov is commenting on is something about this concept of science still being able to save us if we use it in a way that implies saving.
Okay, thank you. Sorry you don't get a final word, Cassie, but I'll
Sorry,
give it
no,
to
I wasn't.
Alex. So Alex,
You know,
you have 2 minutes to wrap all
the
this
very
up.
last thing that he says is silly asses, which I suspect cross us off the first book as well. That we're not intelligent life forms anymore. You know, that we're in a degenerating kind of path. You know, so I think that that's the implication that I get. Forget about maturity.
Where's
we may
the
not
wisdom?
even be intelligent, you know, which is, again, a very poignant kind of jab into where we are.
And just a quick wrap up of how this fits in with our other readings. We've only got about a minute left.
Well, I think all of them are tied together in this really thing that has been, you know, happening in the 20th century and continuing in our century. And that is a real basic, fundamental reevaluation of some core values about honor, patriotism, you know, and life and death on this planet.
And grieving the life and death.
Forgive me, yes,
Yeah.
and grieving as an integral part of all of that. And a key to maybe understanding.
Absolutely, and understanding others. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
You're very welcome.
You made it so interesting, and I loved having you do the readings for us. Thank you. And thanks to you, students. And next time we will be moving on to sexual morality, and so we will have some disclaimers as we start moving in there. Thank you. Bye-bye.